What does it feel like to be immortal? Well, you don't have to think too much about it, because it already happened. Her name was Jane. She was born in a small town where life was slow and predictable. Like most children, she dreamed of growing up, going on adventures, falling in love, and living a full, rich life before eventually fading away into the peaceful nothingness of death. But Jane's life was not destined to follow this script. Her childhood was happy, filled with laughter and the usual mischief of youth. She scraped her knees, cried over lost toys, and held her parents' hands when thunderstorms frightened her. Life was simple, and she never questioned it. She just assumed her future would unfold like anyone else's. But as she grew older, something strange happened. Her friends started to change. They grew taller, their faces sharpened, and their voices deepened. Jane changed too, but only for a while. By the time she reached 25, her body stopped aging. At first, she thought it was a blessing. She watched her friends agonize over wrinkles in their slowly graying hair, while she remained youthful and vibrant. It wasn't until her late 30s that the truth began to dawn on her. The realization struck her like a wave crashing onto a shore. Her best friend, who had aged noticeably since their school days, stared at her one afternoon with a mix of confusion and envy.
"You look exactly the same as you did in college,"
she said, her voice tinged with unease. Jane laughed it off, as she had always done, but that night she stood in front of the mirror for hours. She looked at her reflection, searching for any sign of change. There was none. The truth was undeniable. She wasn't aging. As the years rolled by, her friends grew older, started families, and then, one by one, they passed away. By the time she was 100 years old, the people she loved, the people who made life feel warm and full of meaning, had all disappeared. She was left standing alone, an island in the middle of a sea that was slowly vanishing. It was then that despair settled in. She had always taken comfort in the idea that life was fleeting. The knowledge that everything had an end made her appreciate the small moments. The sunset after a long day, the sound of rain against her window, the warmth of a loved one's hug. But now, life stretched before her, endless and empty. The years turned into decades, and with nothing to look forward to, she fell into a deep depression. Jane tried everything to feel something, anything. She traveled the world, sought out new experiences, and learned countless languages, but it all felt hollow. She even tried to end it, several times. Once, when the weight of her existence became unbearable, she walked to the edge of a cliff and jumped into the ocean. She swam as far as she could, letting the waves pull her under, closing her eyes and surrendering herself to the deep. She sank lower and lower, the water filling her lungs, her body cold and heavy. She waited for the blackness to take her, to slip away into the peace of death. But it never came. Her lungs would not give in, her heart refused to stop. She lay at the bottom of the ocean for days, perhaps weeks, until finally, her body, rejecting death in every possible way, propelled her back to the surface. She washed up on the shore, gasping for air, alive once more. Time passed, and when Jane reached 500 years, she began to find a new purpose. She realized that perhaps she was meant to do something greater with her endless life. If she couldn't die, then maybe she could dedicate her existence to improving humanity. Over the centuries, Jane became a well-known figure, renowned for her unmatched knowledge. She poured her time into historical preservation, becoming an invaluable resource to historians, offering first-hand accounts of events long forgotten by time. She helped scientists develop cures for diseases, using her extensive experience with humanity's endless battle against illness. She grew wealthy and famous, her face never aging but her wisdom growing deeper with every passing year. Her most ambitious work, though, was research to help prolong human life. With the resources at her disposal and centuries of learning behind her, Jane's work was groundbreaking. She was on the cusp of developing a way to extend human life significantly, something that could alter the course of civilization. But just as her work was making real progress, the world was hit by a deadly pandemic. Jane and her team of scientists raced against time, desperate to develop a cure before the pandemic claimed billions of lives. This time, she wanted to live more than ever. She wanted to save the world from this plague, to share the fruits of her research with humanity. For the first time in centuries, she was driven by a real, deep desire to hold on to life. But as fate would have it, right at the moment when she embraced life with both hands, her body began to fail her. It started slowly, with a slight weakness in her muscles, a dull ache in her bones. She dismissed it, thinking it was just exhaustion from her relentless work. But as the pandemic raged on and she worked tirelessly with her team, the symptoms worsened. The fatigue grew unbearable. Her hands, once steady, trembled when she held a pen, and her vision blurred during late-night meetings. Just as the world needed her the most, her immortal body was betraying her. The final blow came one morning when she couldn't get out of bed. Her limbs felt as heavy as stone, her mind foggy. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in centuries, she felt afraid. Not just for herself, but for the world. The cure was so close, but she was slipping away. It seemed that, after all this time, her body was giving up. But unlike the comforting finality of death that most people experience, Jane found herself trapped. She was immortal, but she was dying. Slowly, piece by piece, her life was slipping away, and yet she couldn't die. In her final days, she felt a profound sadness. Not because she was leaving, but because she was still stuck in this world, halfway between life and death. She didn't know how long it would take, but she felt herself fading. She had long lost count of her age, but the weight of immortality had finally broken her spirit. One day, she closed her eyes, hoping for sleep, for rest from the endlessness of it all. She drifted into a deep slumber, her body still, her mind quiet. She never woke up. The cure was distributed, and the world was spared from the devastating pandemic. Jane was honored worldwide as a hero, a legend whose contributions would never be forgotten. Statues were erected, and her name was immortalized in history books. But despite the accolades, some say she's still alive, her heart still beating, her lungs still drawing breath, but her mind, her soul, gone, lost to the void.